Welcome back, seekers and students of literature. Step right into the shadows with me. I am your guide for this explainer, the Moon Spirit. I am the honest guest, the silver eye watching the city of mirrors in the mud from above, where every rain-slicked alley reflects a cosmic mystery or some hidden dread. Today, we're going to explore the profound cosmic dread playing out in the alleys below. We're unpacking a grim, dark, gothic fable, taking a philosophical deep dive into the very forces that contend for our souls. So let's jump right into this tale of fire, frost, and existential decay.
We'll be opening the tome of the four parables to chart our descent. First, the architect of the deed. Second, the mercy of the cold stone. Third, the mirage of the hollow souls. Fourth, the wrath of the predatory ink. And finally, decoding the existential decay.
Let's start with Part 1, the architect of the deed, the forging of authentic values.
To really grasp our first parable, we've got to look back to the First Age, to an entity known as the Red Spectre. And here's the fascinating thing, he didn't actually start out as a creator. In classic Gothic tradition, he was literally a nihilistic executioner who looked at all of existence as just a meaningless error that needed to be wiped out. But then, through this incredible alchemical transmutation, he swapped the executioner's blade for the fire of imagination, stepping up as the guardian of authentic values. As your supernatural tutor here, I really want you to focus on this idea of the spirit of becoming. The Red Spectre uses what's called the logic of the crucible. He essentially takes the raw fire of imagination to melt down the dull lead of history, that heavy, dragging weight of the past, and forges it into the sharp steel of a life-affirming mythos. But listen, this path is exhausting. It's a raw, brutal internal struggle where the self is just constantly destroyed and rebuilt in the blazing heat of creation.
Which brings us to Part 2, the mercy of the cold stone, the last thinker's cessation.
Now, because that forge is so unbelievably exhausting, the seeker naturally gets tired, and right on cue, out of the deepest shadows, steps a completely different silhouette, the monument of stagnation. This ghostly, static figure perfectly mirrors the clinical detachment of the last thinker. It taps straight into a deep psychological and literary concept, the Thanatos drive. This is that deep-seated impulse toward the absolute end of all becoming. It's the craving to just stop the painful friction of creation. So the monument offers what looks like mercy, promising order through these sovereign laws. But you got to read the fine print. These are actually contracts written in disappearing ink. The salvation it's offering, it's really just the clinical end of the soul's movement.
This perfectly sets up the absolute core dichotomy of our fable, fire versus frost. On one side, you've got the logic of the crucible. This is the Red Spectre's realm, raw, exhausting creation, forging the steel of a life-affirming mythos. On the flip side, you have the monument's Apollonian gaskets. Think of this as a chilling, rigid, frozen logic that's designed entirely to bind your fluid spirit and turn you into a stationary anchor. It's the fundamental philosophical debate right here in front of us, the painful necessity of constant becoming versus the insidious allure of terminal decay.
To really feel this philosophy, let's listen to the debate itself. Picture the Red Spectre standing right in front of the roaring forge, shouting over the flames. The self is not a meaningless error, but raw material. We must embrace the fire of imagination and rebuild in the heat of creation. For him, burning away the old self is literally the only authentic way to live.
But then, slipping out from the shadows, the monument of stagnation counters with this voice of chilling, insidious calm. It asks, accept these sovereign laws. Why burn in the crucible when you can find peace as a stationary anchor under the mercy of cold stone? And I mean, for a weary literature student, or honestly any exhausted traveler, you can totally see why that frost sounds so seductive. Why endure the friction of becoming when you could just stop?
Let's move to Part 3, the mirage of the hollow souls, the illusion of progress.
As this great evening creeps closer, a new player enters the board, the ghastly ghoul of Revelation. This uncanny specter projects flickering masks of evolution to completely trick the seeker. It makes you think you're moving forward, when in fact you are entirely static. The ghoul leads your soul into gilded cages and stands you in front of the mirrors of the hollow souls. Look into those mirrors, and you won't see your true struggling self. Instead, you see a perfect universe where absolutely nothing changes. The total erasure of the self gets twisted and celebrated as liberation. The seeker basically degrades into what the text rather hilariously calls a pious cow of contentment, just peacefully grazing inside a tomb of their own making the fatal mistake of confusing terminal decay with the peace of the stars.
Now for Part 4, the Wraith of the Predatory Ink,
The void learns to hunt.
Let's actually map out this horrifying transmutation. Right at the threshold of the void, the debate between the crucible's fire and the monument's frost hits a breaking point. The atmosphere itself liquefies into a state of high-energy flux, stirring up the dust of the old world. Watch how this shifts over time. In the first era, it exists as a static, ghostly monument. By the second era, it starts reaching into the architecture of the frost and actually absorbs those vanishing contracts. Then, in the third era, this violent agitation completely dissolves the entity into a fluid, predatory shadow, the spirit wraith of living ink. By the fourth era, it has fully become a moving stain of terminal decay.
For my literature students out there, we absolutely have to decode this symbolism because the living ink is profound. The void isn't just a heavy anchor passively waiting for your signature anymore. No, it's a liquid void. The text tells us explicitly that this fluid shadow carries the heavy weight of sovereign laws right within its substance. It drifts through the rain-slicked alleys, actively rewriting the erasure of the self directly onto the souls of the weary. Its whole mission is to permanently silence the world by inscribing cold finality onto the fluid spirit. The existential dread has essentially grown teeth. It is actively hunting you.
Finally, Part 5, Decoding the Existential Decay, the Final Conflict.
As a quick study guide for this final conflict, look at how these forces fight for your soul. The Red Spectre uses the crucible to forge authentic values. The monument relies on Apollonian gaskets to enforce total stagnation and cessation. But the Wraith, it uses living ink to actively and aggressively spread terminal decay. The bridge that broke has finally been crossed, and that frozen order is violently disrupted.
Because right in this final hour, a chaotic spark of pure plasma is born from the intense friction of this very debate. A brand new being of fire and frost crystallizes. It dances through the twisted roots, violently shattering those mirrors of the hollow souls, and completely mocking the pious cows of contentment who just accepted the silence of the cage. This pure plasma synthesis forces the spirit of becoming into a radically new dynamic struggle. You aren't just choosing between a forge and a statue anymore. The illusions are burning away, and you've got to navigate a landscape where your destiny is actively being hunted by a shroud of ink.
And so as the moon spirit watching from the rain-slicked alleys above, I'm going to leave you, the seeker, with one final question. When the mirrors shatter and the old world liquefies, caught between a predatory shadow of terminal decay and a chaotic flash of pure mischief, will you embrace the exhausting, painful fire of becoming, or will you surrender to the hunting ink of the void? Think carefully on that as you navigate your own great evening. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the shadows,